Good morning, everybody. Yes, Jeremy, you got it right. My name is Ben Salama. I work for Accenture Digital. I'm the Global Managing Director responsible for our Industrial Internet of Things business. And what I was going to do in the time I have this morning was to talk you through really what are the sort of issues that our customers are thinking about and looking at and facing right now. What are the sort of use cases we're helping them solve for? And then I'd like to spend a little bit of time looking at a couple of actual client examples and some projects, and I think give you a flavor for what I think are very typical of the sort of solutions that are being put out by large enterprises today in IoT. I think it was Gartner that highlighted IoT as being the most hyped technology of 2014. I think that's really not surprising given the huge froth and the huge excitement there's been around consumer wearables, whether it's health wristbands or running and jogging bands, whether it's the launch of the Apple Watch or beacons in retail environments and shopping malls, etc. It's not surprising that it's this sort of consumer area that has created a whole lot of interest around IoT. I think in reality, though, I think if we look hard, we're all waiting and we're all exploring and looking for what are really going to be the killer applications in the consumer space for IoT. And I don't think we've found those yet, and I don't think we've really found the entry point that is going to break open that consumer market in a very consistent way. Interestingly, though, if you look at the industrial space, this is quite different, and that's the area that my team and I focus on, and that we're spending a lot of time really looking at, where we believe the business cases are much stronger, the opportunities are much clearer, and I think perhaps unusually, I mean, if you look at digital over the last 5, 6, 7 years, so much of what we do in digital has been driven by the consumer, and has been driven by the consumer markets and driven into enterprise. And I think IoT, ironically, will be one in which probably the industry and industrial internet will start to reap the benefits far ahead, I think, of the consumer markets. There's a very good study that was produced by the World Economic Forum earlier in this year. I would urge you to read it if you have a chance. It's a study that looks specifically at the opportunities associated with the industrial Internet of Things. They identified the key industries likely to be impacted. So, of course, manufacturing, oil and gas, utilities, mining, chemicals, healthcare. They represent around 40% of the world's economic output, and WEF identified an opportunity in excess of $12 trillion a year in uplift in GDP by 2030, I believe, through successful implementation of industrial Internet of Things. So some really big opportunities. However, sort of getting there is no straightforward matter and is not trivial, and one of the key reasons for that is that we're looking at an extremely complex environment, an extremely complex ecosystem that today requires a lot of stitching together end to end in order to really exploit the benefit that is going to be delivered here. So, depending on which analyst you choose to follow or which one your favorite one, you're looking at something like, let's say, between 30 to 50 billion deployed IoT devices by 2020 seems to be sort of a generally consistent consensus. Of course, that means a lot more sensors out in the field. I mean, if you take today's iPhone 6, I think it's got something like 10 sensors, including obviously location, accelerometer, and so forth. So, your 50 billion devices is probably well in excess of 200 billion in terms of the actual sensors that are actually gathering data and are being used in the IoT. And all of that information is being channeled through networks, of course. Interestingly enough, I think, when machine-to-machine was first, let's call it invented, I guess, by the telco industry, some 10, 15 years ago, their vision, of course, was that all of this data, all of this machine-to-machine data was going to flow over their radio networks. And the reality is that that's only going to be used really sort of for last mile or for situations where the devices are physically moving and can't be tracked in any other way. So I think we're seeing all sorts of new network technologies that are coming along, whether it's sort of low cost or ultra narrowband dedicated networks for IoT, or whether it's different Zigbee and so on technologies being used in the home and elsewhere. So large amount of network traffic, all of this of course going into the cloud, and really the only way to sort of unlock this and to give access to it in a consistent and uniform way for applications will be through the manifestation of very, very large numbers of APIs to open up all this data. And of course, that translates into vast numbers of applications that have to be built. And these applications typically are going to be extremely use case specific. So probably, up to that, if you're moving from left to right here, I mean, up to the API level, you're probably looking at a lot of commonality and a lot of sort of generic solutions. Once you move into the app space, you're looking at very, very specific use case, industry case specific solutions. And so you're looking at specialized app providers in many cases and people with a lot of knowledge and understanding around analytics, for example. And the end result of this is sort of vast amounts of data that we are collecting and that we will be collecting. And in itself, sort of, I think a topic for a different discussion, but opens up some really, really interesting I think, issues in terms of our capability to really mine the vast amount of data that is going to be generated by the IoT. I think, anybody who's in the analytics business will tell you this is all about big data. It's all, let's just collect everything we possibly can and let's write the algorithms to run over it and to crunch it all, and we'll come out with wonderful insights. I think the reality of it is that we will see I believe over time a significant push of the intelligence and the analytics down to the edge here, and that we will not be transmitting vast amounts of data back to central places to be crunched and analyzed. I think the volumes are too big, and actually it doesn't really make sense to do all of that processing in a central place. It will be too expensive and so on. So, but that's sort of the complexity that we're looking at, and that's a challenge really that is being faced, I think, by our customers and by enterprises today in terms of how do they start experimenting, how do they start getting benefits out of this technology. Now, of course, every good technology brings with it a large number of vendors, and just to give you a sense, by the way, don't worry if you can't read this, it's deliberate. Just to give you a flavor for the way the industry is growing from a vendor perspective, and we're seeing really a sort of, as you can see, sort of a threefold increase in the number of vendors involved in the IoT space over a relatively short period of time, sort of 18, 20 months. And I haven't seen updated figures for this year, but I imagine it's been growing at least at the same rate since. So that's the sort of landscape that we're looking at. And of course, the hard thing here for enterprises is actually to figure out who do they work with, who really brings them incremental value, and how do they get, and so how do you differentiate yourself in this market is a big issue, and will continue to be, I think, a big issue for companies going forward. What I wanted to do was to show you a little bit now sort of some of the things that our customers are thinking about, some of the problems that they would like us to help resolve for them, and that indeed we are helping them think through and helping them deploy solutions for. So the first is, I guess let's call it table stakes, right, which is achieving operational efficiency. That's what industrial internet is all about. It's how do you get better use out of your assets. Your assets could be people, your assets could be physical assets, but how do you basically optimize the use of those? So that's the sort of opening stance, if you like, and that's what everybody is looking to achieve in an industrial context as a minimum. But a number of our customers are beginning to look at some much more interesting things, and sort of where do they go, where will they go next, and how can they actually not just focus around saving money, but how can they really focus around making more money for their businesses and driving revenue. And so the way they're looking at this is in a couple of different areas. The first is we're seeing a number of our customers in manufacturing industries starting to think about this move from products to services. So IoT is really, for the first time, enabling companies to fundamentally change the way they sell and the way they sell their products. So instead of just building something, selling it through whatever distribution channels they may have, and then servicing it through whatever service channels they have, for the first time, really, they're able to monitor the performance of their products across the world, everywhere that they've sold them. And that is opening up some interesting and very, very new opportunities for them to fundamentally stop selling a product and to switch to selling a service. So we have one of our customers who's a international tire manufacturer. They started off with a simple view that said, okay, let's instrument our tires. We'd like to understand how to build a better tire. How are our tires performing? We'd like to improve the quality of those tires. And eventually they ended up realizing that actually they didn't need to sell tires to their commercial fleet customers anymore. What they could actually sell is a tire service. So all of a sudden what they're doing is they're actually charging their customers per kilometer of usage. They are the ones that are worrying and thinking about and monitoring the performance of those tires. They're making decisions when those tires need to be rotated around the vehicle, when those tires need to be replaced, and so forth. That's a quite interesting change in business model. I mean, it sort of combines, or it takes what used to be production and service and mashes it all into one. It has a very, very different effect on the way the customer views you, because they're not simply looking at your tires and the features of your tires compared to somebody else's. They're looking at a total service, and it changes that relationship. So we're seeing a number of manufacturing customers who are sort of experimenting and looking at how this will change work for them. And of course, for the client, I mean, very interestingly, one of the single biggest benefits this does is it starts moving cost away from capital expenditure to operating expenditures. You're actually spending money on a transactional basis. You're spending money at the same time as hopefully you're creating revenue and you're actually using the service rather than having to invest it up front. So I think fundamental changes there. And then the third one, which our customers are beginning to think about and some are experimenting with right now, is in the area of what we call unconventional revenues. And here what we're talking about is how do you monetize perhaps data that you're collecting that was never the original reason or never originally in your business case. So let me give you an example here. We run the telematics connected car service for one of the big European car manufacturers. And their entire business case was predicated on the fact that they were just simply going to be able to collect better data, performance data about the vehicles. They were going to be able to reduce the number of recalls they had to do. They would be more precise in terms of how the recalls they had to do. They would understand how their vehicles were being used. They would be able to proactively drive car owners through to the dealerships at the correct moment in time and sort of make their system more efficient. So that's sort of that's the way their business case operated. But of course, what they've realized is something quite interesting, which is, of course, they now know where all of these vehicles are at any given moment in time. They know what the fuel consumption of the vehicle is, how the vehicle's performing, how the driver is actually driving the vehicle. And that data has huge value, not necessarily just to them, but also to potentially their partners. So, for example, they can take that data. They can realize that I'm on a quarter tank of gas. I've only got a little way to go before I run out of petrol. I'm 2 kilometers away from a Shell petrol station. That data is worth a lot to Shell because Shell could then send me, if I'm a Shell customer, they could send me an offer through the vehicle or through my phone in my pocket, and basically drive me to the petrol station or take me to the petrol station. So all of a sudden, the people that, if you think about it, I mean, the internet giants over the last 5 to 10 years have been the ones that are really controlled and own the data, and Amazon, and Google, Facebook, and so on. All of a sudden, you've got a car manufacturer who will be in control of vast amounts of information about where people are, where they're going, how they're driving their vehicles, and with opportunities to monetize that in ways that they probably never realized before. So those are the sort of things things that we see as being the long-term value of the industrial internet. And I don't want to oversell where we are in this journey, because clearly it is a journey, and it's a journey for our customers, and it is an incremental activity. But I think we are seeing that our customers understand that, and they are trying to run pilots, run projects today that will position them in the future. And we sort of see it as this evolving thing that you see here, with a very focus today in the bottom left-hand corner. How do I squeeze operational efficiency out of the assets that I have, but over time, how do I turn that into new revenue streams, into offering outcomes to my customers, and eventually moving into an environment in which really transactions, revenue, business, commerce is being run very much autonomously by devices talking to each other, and sort of changing really the nature of business altogether. So when we look at this within Accenture from an industrial internet perspective, there's sort of two very fundamental use cases that we focus on. And one is in the area of asset management, the other is in the area of the connected worker. And we believe that pretty much everything else that you do in the industrial internet space is some industry-specific combination of those two fundamental use cases. So asset management, I'm sure many of you are familiar about, or familiar with, should I say. It's all about how do you monitor, how do you measure, how do you control, and how do you optimize the use of your assets? So how do you move from an area in which you are reacting to breakdowns, for example, through to an environment in which you're predicting downtime, you're predicting maintenance requirements, you're making sure that the spare parts that you need are there before the equipment breaks down, and you're reducing breakdowns and maintaining uptime. So it's a sort of the classic asset management problem that I think industry has been looking at for a number of years. And IoT, of course, has a very, very fundamental part in optimizing and helping this. So asset management, sort of key use cases for our customers. The second one is in the area of the connected worker. Now, I mean, we've been building, and companies have been deploying connected worker solutions, or shall I say, field force enablement solutions for 20 years now. So, when your gas meter reader comes out to read the meter, or comes to fix your boiler, and that we've had workflow management systems, we've had scheduling systems in the field for a very long time now. There's not a lot new there. What is new here is the fact that IoT is enabling you to arm the worker with a whole new set of devices aimed at doing various things. First of all, fundamentally aiming at making them more efficient at the point of execution of service. So it could be wearable devices that are being used to sort of stream information about what there is they're trying to repair or what they're working on, or allowing them to call up schematic diagrams, for example. It could be trackers which are being used to better understand where workers are, or to improve health and safety within the environment. And as I said, I believe that this is a sort of a whole new generation of connected worker solutions that we're seeing out in the field, and combining this with asset management solutions is driving a whole new set of IoT use cases. And I just want to really close my presentation and show you a couple of examples of those. The first is with Rio Tinto. So I'm sure many of you are aware, Rio Tinto is one of the largest mining organizations in the world. They go through a regular process with all of their plants where they have to basically perform maintenance on the plant. The simplest way of doing that generally is to close the whole plant down and bring in a specialist crew who come in and who clean the plant and who replace things. And this can be a 2-3 month operation. And as you can imagine, it costs a huge amount of money in lost production to actually shut down a plant. And the biggest issues that typically they have in plant shutdowns are to do with the fact that they're bringing in large numbers of contract workers who are not familiar with the surroundings, not necessarily familiar with the environment, and running that program to schedule is one of their biggest nightmares and one of their biggest issues. And every day that they overrun can cost them literally hundreds of millions of dollars. So we actually have been working with them and deployed a solution for them to basically allow them to track both physical assets during a shutdown and to track the workforce during a shutdown. And as a result of that, they've got a real-time view into what is happening, where people are, where they should, and then more importantly, they can make sure they should be where they should be doing the correct amount of work with the correct tools and so on. And it's enabled them to basically run their shutdowns to time and to target, and it saved them significant amounts of money in the process. So again, sort of an interesting example of just combining connected worker technology with connected assets, and the result is sort of real-time analysis for this turnaround. The second example I wanted to show you is a customer of ours in the US. It's also in the mining industry. In this case, a very different situation. This is an open cast copper mine. So I don't know if any of you have ever been to a mine, but a copper mine like this is covering many hundreds of square miles in size. It is absolutely enormous. To give you an idea, I mean, if a supervisor, for example, is working in one of the digging areas and then is required to go somewhere else because there's an issue, it can typically take them 20 to 30 minutes of drive time to actually get in a vehicle and go to where they need to be. I mean, these are extremely large things. Now, interestingly enough, and this is very typical, I think, of what we see in many cases, this mine already collects large amounts of data. So we've not had to go in at this stage and instrument devices. They are already collecting data about all of their vehicles, how their vehicles are performing. They've got CCTV camera around. They've got instrumentation in the trucks, in the diggers, in the shovels, in all sorts of places. The biggest problem they have, and I think this is quite typical, is that all of this information was siloed. And so basically what they did was they had to, they printed out at the beginning of each shift a big stack of papers, which was the starting shift position for all of these devices. And the shift supervisor had this piece of information. So at the beginning of a shift, so this mine runs 2 shifts every 2 12-hour shifts, 365 days a year. And what they had to do here was within an hour of this shift running, they no longer had up-to-date information about what was going on. And the pit supervisor's ability to do anything about it was sort of more or less minimal during the course of the shift. What's happened here is that all of this information has been collected, consolidated, put into the cloud, turned into a series of dashboards on a mobile device that's then issued back to the pit supervisors, and they actually have, for the first time ever, real-time information as to how their pit is operating, and more importantly, how they can make decisions to impact it. I'm just quickly going to show you a couple more screens. This is sort of an opening screen in terms of an opening dashboard, sort of production level information. This is actually a real-time live view of how the pit is performing, and the color coding is the quality of the ore across the pit, and the little, I don't know if you can see them, but there are little sort of white shovels that are actually instrumented and that allow the pit supervisor to redirect where the shovel should actually be digging during the course of the dig. And here, this is information about the trucks, which trucks are in operations, which trucks are not, which are down, why they're down, where they're in service, and various things like that. So I just want to give you an example of those. And this last one, I think, is interesting because it is symptomatic, I think, of what we are seeing, which is that in some cases there is already a lot of data being collected by companies. They're just not using it, or they're just not using it in a good way. And so for many of them, IoT as a first step is really just a question of sort of unlocking the value of the data that they have. before you go to the next step. In this particular case, this is in production now, and we're in the process now of instrumenting a whole bunch of other devices within the mine that haven't been instrumented, and applying some machine learning and predictive analytics to enable us to sort of predict when trucks are going to fail ahead of them doing it, and so on. So there's a whole journey here that we'll be able to walk down with them. Right, I'm going to actually stop here. I've come to the end of my time. I'm here through the day, through till about 4 o'clock, and more than happy to take any questions at that point. Or, I don't know, Jeremy, if you want to take any questions now, or if we're running late, what you'd like to do. Thank you very much.
You talked about the change of approach that goes on within companies away from being a product-based business to a service-based business, which is a very easy and quick thing for us to say on a stage here, but takes such a dramatic change of mindset within a business. How is it that you're able to achieve that? Because I can think of most businesses really struggling with that kind of change of attitude.
Yeah, yes, you're absolutely right, Jim. I think that's it's easy for me to say, right? And the implications for a lot of companies is immense, because many of them, for example, clearly separate the creation of the product, the sale of the product, from the service part of the product. And those are different businesses in some cases, and so on. So somehow looking at how do you fold those things together and how do you do them differently is complex. So, I mean, what we do is we have a sort of a workshop-led and innovation process that we try and take companies through. I have to say that it requires top-down leadership within the organization. This is not sort of middle management thinking this is a cool idea, let me see. This is really enlightened CEOs or enlightened heads of divisions who are looking at this and saying, we want to change before the world changes around us. So there's no, I'm sorry, I'm not sure that I'm answering your question very, very articulately.
Well, I think you are, but I think it's clearly something that isn't going to happen overnight.
No.
Is there a set process that Accenture can walk companies through that is applicable across industry verticals?
Yes, we do. We've got as I say, we've got a process that is a sort of a mix of innovation workshops and business workshops that sort of try and drive out those things. The other thing that we recommend strongly to our customers is, IoT, now is a time to experiment, and I know of a lot of our customers who are doing just that. They're running pilots, they're running proofs of concept, and to their credit, they're going into these things sometimes not with a clear outcome and not with necessarily having everything buttoned down from a business case perspective, but they realize that they've got to go in, play, understand how it works, and that I think some of the best ideas will come out through experimentation, not through business planning.
And also, that's what brings you to the unconventional revenues.
And that's what brings you to the unconventional revenues, because nobody's going to sit in a darkened room and come up with that.
No. Ben, it's been fascinating.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Please, a big round of applause.